What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of Philosophical Differences. Brendan Schaeffer, Josh Jacobs of the Deal in the Cards podcast, back with you for another episode. Josh, how are things going? The Cardinals have finished off that really tough stretch of 19 games against playoff opponents, and, well, it's Luken Baker's world, and we're all living in it. You're not sold, though, on Luken Baker. Is that what you're telling me? Is that your stance? You hate Luken Baker. Is that what?
Okay.
God.
My lead was about to be, I don't hate Luken Baker, but, and then you did that. No.
You
Okay.
hate him. You told me off air. Don't let him fool you, folks. He told me off air he hates Luken Baker.
Yeah, just secretly I despise him. No, no, no. I mean, I was thinking about this morning because I feel like I would get crap sometimes for being like, oh, Lars Newbar had a good 250 plate appearance stretch. You can believe in the upside, and people are like, oh, that's a small sample size. But now, like, Luken Baker has 27 plate appearances, and people want to crown him the starting first baseman next year. I'm not saying he can't be, just saying slow down a little bit. And I want to keep seeing more. Like the recent play makes me think get him in the lineup as much as possible, get him as many at bats as possible, so we can see if this is real or not. But I do think it's worth pointing out he's 1 for 18 against right-handed pitching, and he's 6 for 10, or not even 6 for, he's 3 for 10 against left-handed pitching. He's just done damage. So like it's been good in a super small sample size, but even then it's been really good against left-handed pitching, pretty much nothing against right-handed pitching so far. I need to see more before I fully buy in. And then I think most people are like, there's some that are like, just put Baker at first base full time. I think most people are kind of in conjunction with a Burleson platoon there. But I mean, I don't think it's being talked enough about that Burleson's just not been the same player in the second half. Again, I like him still believe in the upside there. Still think he could be the first baseman next year. But I think there's some like little like flags there that you should pay attention to. And so am I ready to go all in on a Burleson Baker platoon next year? Not quite, but I want to see more from them. And then we can get into a Goldschmidt conversation, but Baker hasn't played any first base yet. We haven't really seen Burleson play a lot of first base either. I have questions defensively about how that's going to look. So there's just questions I still need answered, but I want to see them play more right now when I think the baseball isn't as meaningful as it could be next year. I know they're playing well. The odds are still really low. Give me more Baker in the lineup so I can see if he's a real option for next year. Because it would suck if it's like he ends the year with 40 plate appearances, and it's like, well, like, what do you do with that? Because in one hand, it was really good, but on the other hand, it was 40 plate appearances. So I don't know. Where are you at on Baker?
Okay, so I think that the Cardinals, like, if you flash back 4 or 5 months ago, early this season, even spring training, probably had very little to no consideration for Luken Baker long term. He felt like that guy that was inevitably going to see his time in AAA expire, and he would get waived in the offseason, or whatever the case would end up being, that he wasn't going to be a part of the future. And like you said, is 27, 40, 50 plate appearances enough for look, if folks like him, I'm not saying they're wrong. I like Luken Baker as well. And I actually do think he could have a role that has some value on next year's team. And we'll kind of tie this into all the Goldschmidt stuff and the performance of the recent team. I think all of this kind of can be lumped together, because when you look at Goldie playing so well now, all of a sudden, it's like, hey, what does that mean? Do you suddenly think we jumped the gun a little bit on saying, hey, kiss him goodbye? They can let him go in free agency. But you're also going, well, I do want to get a look at these other guys if that ultimately is the decision to let Goldschmidt walk. We've talked about how I think people don't fully recognize how much they will miss Goldie's defense at first base, whether it's Baker, Burleson, or somebody else we're not really thinking about, maybe one of the catchers that converts and plays some first base too. Like, I think Goldschmidt is going to defend circles around all of those guys at first, but until we get to see some of the other guys, we really won't know for sure. But while the team has won 11 out of their last 19 against that stretch of schedule, that was pretty daunting. You say, hey, the Cardinals are playing the type of baseball you wanted to see from them all along. We did warn, though, that, hey, it could be too little too late if you didn't take care of the schedule in August, and now you're kind of looking at things and saying, well, they don't really control their own destiny. They're still 5.5 back or whatever it is of a wild card spot, and they can play better all they want, but they're going to need some help for that to matter. How do you, as the Cardinals, then prioritize playing time? I think Goldschmidt's going to play every day because he's performing like their best hitter, and that's just going to be what it is. Do you find him some different spots to have him DH to get a look at guys, or are you kind of back into the mode now, a couple of games above 500 as this series against the Mariners approaches, where you're like, no, we can play the younger players still, and we can DFA the Tommy Phams and the Armstrongs, but of the guys that are here, we're still going to try to win that day. I still think there is that sense of urgency, at least from the folks in the clubhouse, to try and do that. So it is kind of interesting to see how they might balance things out the rest of the way. But while they're playing well, I think that is still going to be an internal motivation to try and win games. As far as what I think about Luken Baker specifically, look, I think that there is a skill set that he possesses. It's almost like on next year's roster, he could be the inverse Matt Carpenter. He could take
Yeah.
that roster spot, but because of the fact that they were so left heavy on the bench all season long, and like I hope recent days and recent games for the Cardinals shows folks who always would kind of gripe about why do they care so much about left, right in the lineup? Why does it matter the handedness? It's not just the handedness, it's the skill set that tends to come along with that handedness. And for Luken Baker, it has been performance against lefties, and we saw it in the extra inning win over the Brewers, where Ollie Marmol was able to maneuver with a bench and a skill set off that bench that he just didn't really have for most of the season. Brendan Donovan, as Pat Murphy said after the game, is not a guy that they often pinch hit for. Well, they don't always hit for Donovan, right? Well, if you look back, they haven't always had guys that could capably do it. And I feel like Ollie Marmol maneuvered very well in that last game, where Baker was saved for the opportunity to pinch hit for Donovan to have the advantage in that at bat against Milner, and he gets the base knock, and the Cardinals end up winning. I think that could be his role next year, and you just don't bring Carpenter back. But is that a serviceable enough role when we said basically that these roles of guys who don't play positions but they're effective off the bench, is that enough utility for a team? Maybe not, but I like, and you can tie it into Goldschmidt as well, Josh. I'm sort of the mind that depending on what he wants, you could bring him back. Like, I'm warming up to the idea. I really am. For one, because coming into the year, nobody would have said, "Oh, I want to see Goldschmidt gone after this year." Folks would have said, "Look, hopefully Goldschmidt has a good year, and then they can work out a fair extension midway through or after the fact once he kind of proves himself again." Because last year was a little bit of a down year. Nobody would have said, "Oh, I hate Paul Goldschmidt. I don't want him to be on the team for as long as he wants to be." And now he's playing like that guy again. Yes, for a small sample, but also kind of not. Like, if you look
Yeah.
at the splits since Mother's Day, I know we talk about that a lot. He's
Mm.
basically an 800 OPS since Mother's Day. So
I
I
didn't
don't know
realize
what
it
your
goes back
thoughts
that
are.
far.
It blew my mind too, and the reason is because we kind of look at it and go, we remember the stretches. He's had 2 or 3 of them since in that span that he goes 0 for 19, 0 for 16. But then around that, he's got 10-game hitting streaks, like 4 or 5 of them. It's very bizarre the way the season's gone for him. In pockets, he has been just brutal. But now that he's kind of coming around again, maybe I'm getting suckered back into it, and there are Cardinals fans who are screaming at their screen going, "No, no, don't." But all right, I kind of told you my thoughts on Baker. You tell me your thoughts on Goldschmidt right now with what we're seeing, because he's hitting for power. He's doing it against righties, lefties, hasn't mattered. What do you think?
I'm 100% with you that I'm pretty much sold on bringing back Goldie right now, but there's things that matter, right? Like, how much does he want? Like, I don't think he'd want a 3-year deal, but like, if we're talking stuff like that, it's like, okay, well, maybe we need to pause a little bit there. Is the AAV 20 plus? Like, and also, what are the Cardinals going to do with their payroll next year? Because that will matter some. And the actual bigger question to me is that if they bring him back in maybe 1 or 2 years, how much are they going to ride or die with Goldschmidt again? Is it going to be like this year again? We're again, I mean, now August, September, it's working out. And you could argue since Mother's Day, he's actually been better than what we've thought he was. But there's been stretches where it's like, okay, if this wasn't Paul Goldschmidt, he's probably not playing right now. And if they were more open next year to be like, hey, if there's an 0 for 19 stretch, we're going to have to go to Burleson here or Baker here, then I'm all in on bringing him back. Again, assuming the dollar's right. That's just my biggest concern is that I think if Ollie sees Goldie on the team, he's going to play Goldie no matter what Goldie looks like. But again, like you said, since Mother's Day, he's been good. Since this beginning of July, he's a 126 WRC plus guy, 820 OPS. It's like it's even better since August. It's like a 145 WRC plus. Like he looks like Goldie again. The only thing that's weird is he still isn't good with runners in scoring position. So it's like I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how much of that's just weird luck for him this year. But he's like bottom 5 in baseball with runners in scoring position, and that is, I mean, it matters what you do with no runners on base, but that's more glaring to me. Like what he does with runners in second and third are going to matter infinitely more. And so he's got to figure that out. I'm a little bit worried about that, but I mean, look at your other options right now. Burleson, again, great first half. He's been below average in the second half. Small sample size from Baker, and right now he has proven you cannot hit right-handed pitching. But like you said, I like Burt Baker taking that carp role next year because with how the roster is constructed, you can utilize him more than maybe you would have Matt Carpenter. where you can pinch hit him for Lars Nootbaar, Brendan Donovan in a big spot. And it's like, I actually like Baker here against name left-handed reliever here. And there's just some guys that are built in those moments that can come off the bench and hit. And again, it's a small sample size, but he's shown so far he's a guy that can handle coming in the seventh inning, not playing the whole game and come up in a big spot. And so if you have one roster spot like that, I think that's a valuable tool. And then say it's Thomas Ajayci next year instead of Brandon Crawford. It's like, well, I believe they'll use that role a lot more than they did Brandon Crawford, except for that early like resting Mason Wynn phase. So I think there's a way that you can have a Baker on the roster where it's like you're really mostly here to pinch hit and then the occasional start, assuming there's more utility from the rest of the roster. I think it'll be interesting to see what they do with Ivan Herrera this offseason. I believe he's out of options now. So if they really do like the Paje side of things, like, well, you don't have the option to move Ivan back to AAA again. So is he a trade piece for you? Are they going to carry 3 catchers again? Because that complicates the bench. But yeah, I bet, like, I mean, if you asked me a month ago, I was like, I could not really see a scenario to bring back Paul Goldschmidt. But right now, I'm almost flipped it the opposite way, where there's very few scenarios where I'm not bringing back Paul Goldschmidt, which I think makes a lot of sense at this point.
And I think a lot of people are not on that side, by the way. Like, I don't think that's public sentiment, which is fine because I'm not 100% sold on anything, but I think we have to at least be a lot more open to it. Again, for a while, it was all performance based. You're like, well, this guy, he's the name. He's Goldie when you write him in the lineup, but he's not when he steps to the plate.
Yeah.
And that is going to be a hurdle, I think, for any manager that's managed him when he was the MVP to then say, oh, I have to treat you differently. Again, I keep hearkening back to Carpenter. When he left for a while and came back, it was easier to assimilate him into the role he's in now. Obviously, he's injured now, but like that's sort of the way that I think you would have envisioned that going down. So I don't know, man. When it comes to Goldschmidt, I do think a lot of people are going to say, don't be fooled by this. It was months and months where he didn't look like that guy. I would contend that it was mostly April and early May when he was just really, really struggling. And then since then, he's struggled for pockets, but it's been like 5 days at a time. And then he's kind of back to bringing himself out of it, which, I don't know what goes into that. A season's always going to ebb and flow. But yeah, kind of curious to see what ends up playing out with where they want to, because I agree. I don't think you could just look at Baker and Burleson, not only offensively, but defensively and say, yeah, that's going to be fine. I'm not sure about that. And then also the notion of Baker, but I'll play devil's advocate. If you have Goldie back and he's kind of your mainstay first baseman, but Burley could play there some, and you have Baker around as well to just kind of be that right-handed Matt Carpenter off your bench. I agree that Sajasi slots in as somebody who, hey, Baker takes the at-bat for Donovan. You can put Sajasi where you kind of have to and, can make it work. Now suddenly you're right-heavy, especially when your backup catcher is going to be right-handed. So, like, who's that other lefty off the bench? Obviously, Nolan Gorman's not here right now, and you'd like him to be. And now we're talking about there being maybe more players. So they're going to have to figure some things out. They also got to figure out, and I'm not as hard-pressed about this. It's been a huge topic, and I kind of roll my eyes at it, but I understand why people feel this way. I'll shift gears a little bit and ask you about Michael Caniani, Victor Scott II. They kind of feel like similar players. One of them had a prospect pedigree coming into the year. One of them was a total afterthought coming into the year. The one that was an afterthought has kind of acquitted himself rather nicely and looks like, to me, just the bona fide fourth outfielder that you'd want to have on your team, because he's a good defensive replacement. And that's like, for him, you can box him into that role in Michael Caniani and say that's what he is. And he's going to tell you, no, I'll keep showing you that I'm one of the best defensive outfielders in baseball. And I think he is. But then, like, what's the bat? I think for a lot of people, it's very simple that, well, Victor Scott is not a guy you want to use for that role because you have higher hopes for him long-term because of the prospect pedigree. But right now, I like that Victor Scott has taken better at bats recently. And I do wish that they would have more spots for him to play right now, because you can then get a better idea of where he is heading into next year. But I also don't know that for sure we're going to look at Victor Scott next year and say, yeah, he's got to be on the big league roster, rather than starting the season in AAA and getting everyday at bats. How do you view Caniani v. Victor Scott? Because I think most people are, oh, it's ridiculous that Ciani's playing. And I'm like, I think Caniani is a player that should be on the Cardinals for, the next 5 or 6 years, but to fill the role that he's going to fill. And I get it. They're both left-handed hitters who are defense first at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like if Siani's your fourth outfielder, if he almost feels more valuable to you than he would be to someone else. But Victor Scott as your fourth outfielder feels more valuable to someone else than he does to you, in my opinion. So that's where I like typecast. If Siani ends up continuing to be higher on the totem pole, that's where the fit gets questionable to me. But if Scott ends up being the long term play, and I'm still higher on him, I just think he has higher offensive upside, and we know what he can do on the bases if he finally gets unleashed there. And part of that is just getting on base more. And again, Siani's just been so good defensively that it's not fair to just say, "Oh, Scott will get there one day." But could he get within the realm of it? I think that's possible. So I would like to see Scott get more and more opportunities, especially down the stretch if they count themselves out. Just because I don't know if Siani necessarily needs it to prove. Like Siani kind of feels like one of those guys where he's kind of already hit his ceiling, and maybe there's a little bit more there, but I don't necessarily see him continue to get better and better. I think this is probably who he is, but I think there's room to grow for Scott. I don't think you have to choose one or the other. And to your point, if that bench ends up getting right-handed heavy, it doesn't help with like pinch hitting. It's not like Siani or Scott you're bringing off the bench to be like, oh, we got a left-handed bat here. But you don't necessarily need a right-handed platoon for that guy either, because you'd be right-handed heavy everywhere else. So you can afford to have that center fielder who you know is going to give you great defense, and maybe can hold his own against lefties, but hold his own is in just not be league awful or leads awful on that. But I don't think they're as redundant as some people think they are. I just think I don't love the fit of Siani playing over him long term. If that ends up being the play, then I don't know why. Like, I'd rather have something else on my bench than Victor Scott and utilize him because I just think he's more valuable than that. But yeah, it remains to be seen too, because a year from now, Scott could just be still. He was better when he came up. He was more in line with Siani's offense, but his defense isn't up to Siani's. He had like a stretch there where he was like 20% above league average, like 2 weeks, and then Siani came back. But that's, again, I just said a small sample size for Baker. I have to say the same thing
Sure.
for Scott. So there's a world next year where Scott's I don't think league average, but closer to league average offensively. Or there's also a world where he's back to last year, where it's like, man, this guy needs to sit in Memphis. So I like having Siani there as insurance, because I'm like, you dangle him out there, I don't know what you get. Like, I don't think it's worth giving him up, and it doesn't hurt you at all to keep him. So yeah, I just think, again, philosophically down the stretch, we have less than 2% chance of the playoffs, and I don't think this team really has it in them. I'd rather see the young guys play. That's where I want to see Scott playing. But for 2025, I like having both around. And injuries happen. Like, you're like an underperformance, like, have some extra options.
Siani was just gone for a month because of an injury, and it's like I feel like people in November are always like, "Well, you gotta trade somebody, you gotta trade Gorman or Donovan. You have to." Well, I mean, stuff ends up happening, and it doesn't always go that way during the season. It's always easier to jettison guys in the offseason in our minds when then, like, attrition happens and you go, "They don't have enough outfielders."
Yeah.
I do agree the roster, like, the fits of certain guys and all the different roles, the puzzle could fit together more effectively, and maybe next season it will. And by the way, Matt Carpenter is not injured. He's on the active roster. I said he was injured. We haven't seen him in a full week, like more than a week. And so I kind of forgot he was there. But anyway,
Yeah.
I specific to the situation here, I agree and understand the sentiment behind Scott, because you mentioned about Siani that he's maybe kind of at his ceiling offensively with what he's done recently. And I looked, since May 1st, his batting average is 272. We care about more than batting average, though, and his OPS is 641 in that span. So that's, there is a limited upside, even if we would say that Siani's been the better version of himself. I don't think he's going to end up hitting for a lot of power. I think Victor Scott could hit for more power, and that's where the
Yeah.
differential comes in.
And I think Siani's BABIP, if I'm not mistaken, in the stretch is super high too. It's like in
Sure.
the 350s too. So it's like, I think there's actually regression there from what he's doing. Again, I could be wrong on that, but I think
Mean
with
OPS,
Scott,
in your opinion, like
yeah.
what's Michael Siani's OPS, true OPS as a player, like if he plays for the next 5-10 years?
Oh man, 640,
Okay.
650. Like,
That'd be pretty,
but with the defense in center field, that's a different story than someone else. So I'm not, but I just think I have more hopes for Scott there, where he can be
yeah.
closer to 700. He's stealing a lot of bases, and the defense is about the same. And I think anecdotally too, like having that kind of guy in the lineup on the bases, like there's anecdotal effects that maybe Michael Siani doesn't, where he's fast, but he's
He
not
does those
necessarily.
things, but
Yeah, but it's just not like Scott.
yeah.
But
See, but I think so defensively, I think Siani is as good as it gets basically in baseball. I'm all in on him defensively, in center field, Siani.
well, wait, hold up. Wait, sorry. Did you see the news that
No,
Gary LaRocque is retiring?
I did not see the news, so we can certainly react to that. Is that like just now news?
Yeah, John Denton
Oh,
just
I'm
tweeted
sitting
that
here
out.
talking to you, man. I wasn't looking at that. No, but we'll definitely let's finish up on this and then
Yeah.
we'll get right into that because people could see maybe some live reaction. And of course, development has obviously been a big topic of conversation, and this might be just the most appropriate way to kind of freshen things up with everybody maintaining, fire a person like that. So we'll
Yeah.
kind of get into that. But I was going to mention Caniani right now defensively, love him. Think he's about as good as it gets. Victor Scott has the skill set to be Caniani plus because I think he's just even a little bit of a better athlete than Caniani, who I consider to be a very good athlete. I don't think Victor is there yet defensively with just the smoothness and the experience
Yeah.
of playing it at that level and major league speed for just he's just a little bit behind. But some of the stuff that Victor Scott can do, he's going to get there. I have no question in my mind that defensively he's going to get there. I think Caniani has that stolen base ability and can play small ball. Best bunter in the organization, probably. I know that for the folks that love the bunt, a lot of people don't. I think that's actually somewhat valuable, and they found
Yeah.
times to use it for Caniani this year. But I think Victor Scott, the bat is going to play. I remember spring training. I think I asked Ollie Marmol this question during spring training, and I said, maybe this isn't a fair comparison, but you see sort of the comp of Victor Scott is kind of right now in February 24 where Mason Wynn was a year ago.
Mm.
And if that's the case, and he said he didn't like shoot me down and say that was a dumb question. So if we want to buy into that for a moment, okay, how did last year play out? Mason Wynn played down the stretch a bunch, didn't hit. I mean, he just didn't hit at all. And it's not that he played poorly. I think he acquitted himself. He didn't hit, but he got that experience. And then what have we seen from Mason Wynn this year? So, like, that would be the argument in favor of right now, finding a way to play Victor Scott as much as you
Yeah.
can. And I don't think it's a bad argument. I also think that Caniani can be a player on this team for a while, but I would not be exclusively probably going Caniani. I would try to mix it up a little bit more than, and I'm not afraid to put one of them in a corner either and just kind of see what would happen there. I know you're
Yeah.
probably losing offensively a little bit, but maybe not. I mean, not if Victor Scott's going to, find his next gear. But I think because they are above 500, they aren't looking to do that. You're talking about sitting guys like Nootbaar and other guys at that point that
Yeah.
Ollie Marmol probably doesn't want. But if you had Walker and Wright and the other two running around out there, you probably have. I mean, it's a pretty nice outfield. I don't know defensively. There's a lot to kind of figure out there though because of the glut of players that they have. But
Yeah.
that's my roundabout thoughts. If you have anything else to add it, and then let me know on Gary LaRocque because that's just coming down as we're recording here.
Yeah, well, I guess just one thing to add to that too is like we can go back to spring training this year. We all were hopeful Mason Wynn was going to be a very impactful player. But even the expectations, a lot of people are like, he's going to remain on the roster the whole year because of his defense, and his bat will come around at some point. And the bat just was there from the beginning. So to come into 2025 with Victor Scott penciled in center field already, expecting the bat to play the whole year feels even more riskier than the eggs they put in the Mason Wynn basket. So to your point, for the people that maybe would be like, hey, get rid of one or the other with Caniani, I like having the insurance there because at the very least, what Caniani brings to the table and you could bet on the upside of Scott. I guess just to roundabout, my only quarrel would be right now with how I feel the team should be playing. I want Scott playing at least more than he is. And then going into next year, I want it to be his job to win rather than like I think if they're about even, or even if Scott's a little bit below at the beginning of the year, I want Scott playing to see what's in there, or in AAA playing every day. I don't want him sitting on the bench not playing a lot, but I don't think that's their plan either. I think right now they're trying to win, and they think Scott on the roster helps them do that.
And that's kind of how they were using Jordan Walker before when we didn't really like it. I think this
Yeah.
at least fits a little bit better. The Memphis season's still going on though. Victor Scott can maybe be getting those at bats. They're trying to find that line of like development versus, hey, we're still above 500 and we want to show that we're a pretty good team, and maybe the Braves and Mets come back to us. Okay, give me your thoughts here. We won't go too much longer on this pod, but give me your thoughts on the news. And this is down from the Cardinals. I'm checking my email now. That Assistant General Manager, Director of Player Development, Gary LaRocque, will retire at the conclusion of this season and will remain with the organization in 2025 in an advisory role. And obviously, he has been a fixture for the Cardinals organization for a long time. But Josh, a lot of folks have said, does this org need a little bit of a refresh in terms of that development department? This is maybe a move that ultimately leads toward that. And does it spell that perhaps they're looking to make some additional changes in the front office elsewhere? Could this just be, I'm not suggesting necessarily firings, but could there be some reorganization coming that is not just confined to this move?
I think so. I mean, that to me, what this communicates, because they're like, for the ones who want John Mozeliak to do something like this, that would never have been announced midseason. That was not going to happen unless they were way out of it, right? But like what this tells me is this is maybe a role that they could have maybe start the breadcrumbs coming of, hey, we've got some change down the pipeline, and maybe this was the little one that we're going to float out there first. Again, like I think I feel like he's one of the names that a lot of Cardinal fans aren't as familiar with, but the ones who are maybe are like the fire, get rid of, whatever. But like with a lot of the guys in the Cardinal front office, there was a heyday where LaRocque was probably one of the guys seen in baseball as one of the best at player development, and it just seems kind of like the game passed him by. I don't know what it is, but for some reason, it just hasn't been what it needed to be lately. I like the fact that he's actually remaining with him in an advisory role, because if they do bring in an outside perspective or they reorg a little bit, it's never a bad thing to have someone else that's been in the role before kind of influence things a little bit. But I think we'll either see more of these things or people step away from the organization. I think this is just a sign of what's to come for the Cardinals organization and front office at this point. And to me, like, there was a little fear that there was going to be very little turnover, and for something like this to be already announced, maybe I'm overstating it, but to me, it feels like it's the beginning of some. I don't know if it's as major changes as Cardinal fans want, but I really am feeling pretty confident that we're going to get a pretty big revamp plan in October or November, whenever that will go down. I don't know how quickly Mo moves out of power and leadership, but again, if they identify, when we've talked about Chaim Bloom left, that he's the guy, I have very little doubt that he's going to have at least significant, if not final say on things, because it's weird leadership to be like, hey, you're going to be in charge of this in a year, but I'm going to trump you on decisions like that. I don't think anyone wants that. And something that I think why the DeWitts talk so often about, they love the continuity and they love the unity they have, is because back when John Mozeliak took over the Wall Jockey days, it was the exact opposite of that. It was fractured. There were different things going on within the organization, wasn't good. And Mozeliak brought a lot of unity to that. And so I don't think they want a year of transition where it's like a struggle for power. I think we're going to start seeing some people elevate into new roles, whether it's a Bloom or other people from outside the organization, or maybe there's some internally that get elevated as well. You still have some mainstays around to help influence it, but it's more of like, hey, we're going to help you step into these roles, rather than like, hey, you're next to us and it's your turn next, but let me finish out one more year. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Because we're reacting live and we don't have any other info. So
no, I agree. And I don't know how much this, like that for LaRocque could have come anyway, maybe regardless of the way people feel about the way the Cardinals development, because he's been around for a long time and sometimes people retire, right? But I do think when you look a little more closely at the gripes that folks have about the way the Cardinals have really failed to develop a lot of their guys to the extent that we'd hope to see. And that's not any one person. Like, I don't think it's like, yeah, we needed Gary LaRocque to step. I don't really know that it's that. I know a lot of people felt that way. I do think additional perspectives is key. And for the longest time, and that can apply to just the overall organization as well, because Mozeliak has been the figurehead, but also the decision maker on all of these fronts. And so to realize that they are going to have to reorganize a little bit when maybe the next guy comes in and he'll have that absolute power as well, but maybe also Mozeliak built that up over the course of time, right? It's not because of he didn't step in 2007 with that level of authority over all sweeping aspects of the organization. I think it kind of developed over time as he proved himself, and that's how it would be very tricky. Like they could do something that the roles and the titles and what they call it could surprise us a little bit. But I agree with you. Even if it's not Mozeliak relinquishing his role, there's going to have to be the percentage of change in terms of like who is in charge here is going to have to be a little bit more collaborative as you transition, and they'll decide what that looks like. But it feels like this player development area is going to be a part of that as well. It's hard to speculate now exactly on the extent of the changes that could be made, but yeah, I think there's going to have to be some reorganization, because whether it happens now or in a year from now, after 2025, Mozeliak's not going to be in charge of baseball ops, and I don't know if they're going to hand the keys to the kingdom over to somebody with that level of authority, or if even if they do, it's going to have to look a little bit different beneath that to ensure that there is unity and synergy, and maybe guys that are in that organization right now will have different titles, different roles that better fit whatever the vision for the future is. That's kind of my instant thoughts. Josh, do you have anything else before we hop out of here for this edition of Philosophical Differences?
The only thing I can think of, and I'd have to go fact check myself, so don't take it totally there, but I'm pretty sure when I went to the Blogger Day this year and Mozeliak talked about Bloom, and I swore that he said there he was making at least some of his presentation to him and ownership in August of this year, and it feels like a lot of this it would have been player development driven too. And so again, I don't think it necessarily means this is why Gary LaRocque is in a different or retiring, going to advisory role. But it does feel like one of the main things he was taking a look at, and again, you've already said this, was this. And so this is the area I would expect the most changes to. I don't think there's some quarrels about scouting and developments, or well, this is development scouting sometimes. I mean, there's been some odd picks from the Randy Flores era, but there's also been some slam dunks. But I don't think that's necessarily the area they were trying to change up here. Again, I think we all can agree there needs to be some change in the front office in terms of how they manage the major league club as well. But it does feel like the red flag blasting thing of like, we used to do this super well, and now it feels like we're really bad at it. It's player development. So at the very least, I'm very encouraged to see there's some changes here, but we also have to see what happens. So this is the first step. It seems like it's trending in the direction people wanted it to, but we'll see.
We'll see indeed. He's Josh Jacobs. You can find his work with the Deal in the Cards podcast. Those guys keep growing all the time. So make sure to follow all their channels. Follow my YouTube channel, Brenden Schaeffer, St. Louis Cardinals writer, as we'll continue mostly on Fridays with philosophical differences and bring in the perspective on all the Cardinals happenings. Appreciate you guys for watching, for listening as always, and we'll talk to you next time on the show. Peace.